Let's learn a bit more about class blueprints by adding one inside our pickup here to enable us to control its color directly. Now there's a few different ways to create blueprints. I mentioned before that in the toolbar there's a blueprint button that'll let you create a new empty blueprint class. However, you can also head down to the content browser and just right-click anywhere in the empty space and create a blueprint class from there as well. However, for our purposes, what we want to do is add script directly to an asset within our scene. So just select that asset and then head over to the Details tab and click on the Blueprint button. It'll ask us for a location to save this, so let's go ahead and select our Blueprints folder and rename it to something a little bit more descriptive. Something like Pickup Color Change _BP for Blueprint, and then click Create. Now it'll automatically throw up a new window, and this is the Blueprint Editor window. Let's grab the tab here, go ahead and dock it to make use of our real estate. Now before we get into writing the scripts themselves, let me give you a quick tour of some of the user interface. Much of this is very similar to other editor windows in Unreal Engine 4, such as the toolbar here or the Details tab. However, with Blueprints there's a couple key differences, and that's namely this Components tab in the top left. This is where you'll find our static mesh, for example, in this project. However, you can also add new components, such as audio or other geometry, even simple meshes like cubes and spheres. And this is really where you'll start to compile all of the different aspects and components of your different blueprints. And then the My Blueprint tab below that is where you manage all of your event graphs, functions, macros, and variables. Right now we're in the Viewport section of the Blueprint Editor. However, if you notice next to the tab here, there's also a construction script and an event graph. Now these work much in the same way as the Material Editor, in that you right-click and drag to pan around and then scroll to zoom. And essentially what you're doing is grabbing off of these execution pins and dragging these wires, very similar to the Material Editor. When you release, it'll give you a large menu of different options. Again, very similar to material editing. However, these are all specific to writing scripts. Now, the key difference between the event graph that we're in right now and the construction script is that the event graph has these events for beginning play and event tick. What this means is that the event graph only operates during gameplay. So essentially, it ignores everything that's in your script until you hit the play button, and then it starts to run all of these. Whereas the construction script, it runs all the other times. So when you're working in the editor, even as you're manipulating your blueprints, this construction script essentially is just constantly running this execution chain. This is really useful for creating things like the color change tool that we'll be building in the next video, as well as more precise controls for scaling or organizing and arranging your content within the scene. And finally, maybe the most important button in the entire Blueprint Editor is this Compile button up in the top left here. Any change to your blueprint will be frozen until you click the Compile button. So let's go ahead and make a change just so we can kind of see. Let's drag off of this and we'll just add a random node. Notice how the Compile button switched from a check mark to a question mark. That means that it's waiting to be compiled, and any changes that we've made won't show up on our scene until we click that button. So once we hit compile, of course it's giving us an error because we haven't filled in this particular node, but for our purposes, just make sure that this compile is always a check mark before you go back into your scene to expect to see any changes. More than just game logic, Blueprint gives you the power to create helpers and tools for yourself directly in the editor. Now let's get to scripting.